We're here this evening as a result of a U.S. Department of Transportation TAG grant through PHMSA, and the League, through Dr. Winters, who you'll meet in a minute, wrote this grant, and the League Citizen Education Fund was awarded the grant. So we're very thankful for the funding, and we are also very thankful to Cedar Crest. We've been working on this grant for a year. We've done several forums in Berks, Bucks, Lehigh, and Northampton counties, 16 programs for adults, 8 programs for children, resource materials in the library, and that's just a fraction of it. So we are here concluding the final piece, which is pipeline planning, strategies for pipeline planning. And so we shall begin. But in this final piece of the grant work, we needed to enlist the help of a facilitator. So what we did is we contacted the Center for Excellence in Local Government at Albright College, and we have Mr. Paul Jansen here, Executive Director, and he is going to tell you a little bit about that.
Good evening, and welcome. I'm on foreign ground here, having Center for Excellence in Local Government is at Albright College in Reading, and we serve the 73 municipalities and the county of Berks in Berks County. And typically, I would not be doing a project like this, but Julianne contacted me and asked me if I would consider doing this because it is an issue that transcends Berks County, and it transcends Berks County along with Northampton and Lehigh, and to a certain extent, Bucks County also. And our task was to try to assemble a group of individuals that could address the issue of safety of our existing pipelines and safety standards that can be done if new pipelines are coming in. We assembled a group of people. The first 4 are listed on your form there from Berks County, and I'm very proud of this group of people in terms of municipal government because they represent all parts of this issue. The first person is the Honorable Mayor Gary Kraft, who is the mayor of Moton Borough, which is outside of Reading. He's also the Kraft Engineering, and he does engineering reviews for a multitude of municipalities in Berks County, some of which are getting hit with brand new pipelines and a lot of which have existing pipelines. So he's done professional work on those. But he also he's the president of the Berks County Association of Boroughs, which is 28 boroughs in Berks County. Second person is Brian Potts, who's the township manager of Berne Township. Berne Township happens to have the crossroads of 2 major pipelines. And some of you may have read of a big gasification plant that's being proposed in Berks County in Lower Heidelberg Township. There is a pipe that was proposed to come off of one of those major lines in Berne to feed that plant. And so Brian has a lot of experience in that. Jim Mole is the Director of Engineering and Planning for Spring Township. It's a very large township outside of Reading. It extends from right outside of the city of Reading all the way down to the edge of the county. Jim happened to be at the very crossroads of a company coming in and proposing a new pipeline, and all he knew was as it comes into spring and as it leaves spring, and we didn't know where it was before it came to spring and afterward, and you'll hear a little bit about that later on in the program. And then finally, Cheryl Auerbach is a county planner with the Berks County Planning Commission, and she has been tasked with working on pipeline regulations as it relates to planning and county roles for the last 10 years. And I'm really excited about the work that I think we're about ready to start with the Lehigh Northampton Planning Commission, working with Berks County and this concept that we're going to talk about tonight. So I'm very happy about that. We were blessed to find John Gatt, who is a private consultant out of Chester County. And for those of you that don't know, Chester County is way ahead of a lot of us in gas because it comes out of the southeast and comes up through Philadelphia into the harbor and then up into the northeast. And I used to manage a community in Chester County, and there's a lot of big gas pipelines, actual jet fuel pipelines. There's a lot of different stuff underground there. So John has done a lot of work with Chester County, and you'll see some of that tonight, and he has a wealth of knowledge about the issues that are associated with the MPC, subdivision, land development, road occupancy permits, and all of those kinds of things that are associated with planning for local governments. And then finally, we partnered with Julianne Skinner and with Roberta Winters from the League of Women Voters. We did a all-day session back in June, and then we've had probably 3 other days where we spent upwards of 2 hours on the telephone as a conference call or working together on progressing the thoughts and the concepts that came forward out of this one-day session back in June. So I'm very proud of the work that they've done. Tonight, we're going to have a presentation on what that work is associated with. We're going to see if we can get this figured. But recently, we were contacted by Mayor Pulowski here in Allentown, and he asked if he could come and make a presentation because gas pipeline safety is a serious issue for him in the city of Allentown, as you all know. And he wanted to have an opportunity to speak, and we're very pleased and honored to have him come tonight. So, Honorable Mayor, would you like to take the podium?
There we go. I want to talk to you about pipelines. As you all know, Allentown experienced a major gas explosion here back in 2011, February of 2011. And because of that explosion, I was really catapulted into understanding what pipelines are all about. Back in 2011, we had a gas explosion that basically obliterated an entire city block here in Allentown. The explosion happened as a result of a gas main break that was in the street. It was just a transmission line that was delivering gas to a local neighborhood. The pipe was about 80 years old. It was a cast iron pipe. Had cracked actually in the street itself, just due to age and deterioration of the pipe. And the gas had leaked in through subsurface limestone that we have here in Allentown, which is very prevalent here in Allentown, seeped into an elderly couple's house that was on the corner of that street. They didn't even have a gas connection in their house. Something must have ignited it, probably turning on a light in their basement, instantaneously blew them up, blew up the entire city block, killed 6 people and leveled 8 homes, 5 people, leveled 8 homes and injured about 60 folks in that blast. The elderly couple where the blast originated was killed instantaneously as a result of that particular blast. Before I get to that, what I realized at that particular point in time is that, you know, there's very little regulation. I wasn't paying attention to this infrastructure. Many of you probably aren't paying attention to this infrastructure if you're municipalities. It wasn't my infrastructure. It wasn't my water's infrastructure. It wasn't my sewer infrastructure. It wasn't something that I needed to pay attention to. And quite honestly, I assumed, wrongly so, that someone was monitoring these gas lines, that someone out in the state was actually making sure that they were safe, that they were transporting a substance that was flammable and ignitable, and that there was some regulatory agency out there that was actually doing their job of making sure that this product was delivered safely to the tenants in my city and other cities across Pennsylvania. I assumed wrong. Because there's very little regulation. There's little to nothing when it comes to pipelines in the state of Pennsylvania. There's very few regulators. There's only 6 or so in the PUC itself, but that does very little to actually regulate these pipelines. The office that actually regulated pipelines in the DEP has been dismantled, for lack of a better word. And so we have very few regulators, and the NTSB and PHMSA have less than 200 regulators nationwide to look after all the nation's pipelines. And so, and they have very little power or teeth to actually hold these gas companies accountable. And so I realized that this was a mounting problem, one that was an ever-growing problem, one that as I come to realize what was happening in my city and throughout Pennsylvania, quite honestly scared me. In fact, I had reporters asking me many times, what is the thing most, Mayor, that you're most afraid of? And I said, honestly, it's our pipelines underneath our street. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. There's all, I'm worried about budgets, and I'm worried about safety, and I'm worried about crime, and I'm worried about economic development, and everything else that a mayor worries about. But the one thing that keeps me up at night is these pipelines, because I realize that this is really, quite honestly, a ticking time bomb underneath our city streets. I also came to realize that we're not alone. This is San Bruno, California. This is a sister city out on the West Coast. San Bruno had a major gas explosion. We had a distribution line that was going through our communities. Thank you very much. That's awesome. You can all see now. They had a transmission line going through their community that they had no idea was even underneath the ground. That transmission line leaked. It exploded. It leveled 55 homes instantaneously. You can see the damage that occurred there. 8 people were dead. Fortunately, most of the folks in that community were actually off at work. It was during the day. 60 were injured as a result of this particular blast. And they're still dealing with the effects of this many, many years later, as we are here in the city of Allentown. In fact, they had a situation where they had a major transmission line, similar to what we have here in Pennsylvania, where there's no automatic shutoff valves. They couldn't find how to shut off the gas. The gas raged for hours. In fact, the mayor told me that it was so hot and so intense, the heat, that it actually literally melted the fire trucks that went to the scene to put out the fire. I mean, literally melted them. The tires melted to the ground. And I could testify, because Allentown was the same scenario. When the gas line exploded, it took us 8 hours, literally 8 hours, to figure out how to turn the gas flow off to the fire to actually be able to extinguish the fire. We had to literally dig up streets around the city trying to figure out where the shutoff valve was, because the gas company had no idea how to even shut off the gas that was flowing into this fire. So for 8 hours, it basically fed the fire like a giant gas fireplace. And no matter how much water we put on it, no matter how much manpower we threw at it, it was an impossible task to put out. Finally, after those 8 hours, we figured out that about almost 3 blocks away, we had to literally dig up the street, find this old shutoff valve that was underground, and actually turn the gas off to that part of the neighborhood so they could extinguish the fire. The same happened in the San Bruno. And then the list goes on. This is in Philadelphia in 2011, 1 dead, 5 injured, 3 buildings destroyed. This is in Brentwood, New York, 1 dead, 17 wounded. New Milford, Connecticut, 1 dead, 2 severely injured. This is Springfield, Massachusetts, 42 buildings damaged, 18 injured as a result of, again, a gas line break. This was Smithsonville, West Virginia. This was a 20-inch transmission line that was actually running along the interstate there. As you could see, this line had a lot of power to it and a lot of gas. Because it was a transmission line, it was a bigger line pushing more pounds per square inch, and it went off like a little nuclear bomb. This one, because it was in a rural area, didn't do as much damage, but 5 homes were destroyed and several were severely damaged, as well as others were damaged in the process. And this is what we are here today to talk about. We're here to talk about the pipelines that are running through our communities, the proposed pipelines that are running through our communities, because what you all need to be aware of is that there's very little regulation, there's very little oversight that's associated with these pipelines from the gas companies. For the most part, Pennsylvania and the United States has a hands-off policy, where it's a policy of self-regulation by these utilities. It's a policy of not actually having to put in or comply with putting in automatic shutoff valves, leak detection systems, things that would actually prevent these types of explosions from happening. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm not here to make you afraid, I'm just here to give you the facts. The pipe that blew up in my city, that leveled an entire city block, was pushing about 10 pounds per square inch. It was just a distribution line. Lines like this in West Virginia that are transmission lines that are being proposed through Berks County and through Northampton County are transmission lines. They're pushing anywhere from 10 to 20,000 pounds per square inch. So you can imagine the force of what will happen if there is a leak, if there is a disaster, an explosion as a result of the gas being transmitted through these pipelines. This one was in Kansas City, Missouri in 2012, leveled an entire city block, 1 dead, 15 injured. And of course, just recently, in March of this year, we had an explosion in an apartment building in East Harlem in New York City that killed 8 folks and injured 70 others. And it was a result of a gas line that broke. And so we have some real issues here. The human toll is tremendous. The records that I've been able to locate between 2010 and 2012, we have about 21 folks who have died as a result of these gas explosions, 145 people who have been injured as a result of these gas explosions, and hundreds of millions of dollars in property loss. Now, as I said, there's very little regulation. I have regulation for my water and sewer plant from the floor to the ceiling and maybe a ceiling above this that is given down to me from the EPA, the DEP, the Delaware River Basin Commission, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, just regulation on top of regulation. There's literally no regulations in the state of Pennsylvania for pipelines. I mean, literally none. There's very little, if any, regulation that isn't self-regulated on the part of these gas companies here in the state of Pennsylvania. And, when my sewer pipe breaks, unless you go to your basement and pick it up and the crap off the ground and eat it, nothing's gonna happen to you, right? When a gas line leaks, when these explosions occur, this is a flammable substance that blows things up. And so we need to be concerned as the public. We need to take notice of what's happening here in our state and what's happening within our communities. And we have to really, I think, wake up to the fact that unless we're getting engaged and we get our neighbors and our communities engaged in this process, these pipelines will go in. And I'm not against pipelines, but I want them to be put in safely. I want them to be monitored. I want to make sure someone's looking out for how they're putting those wells in. I want to make sure they have automatic shutoff protocols and technology that's put into place. I want to make sure that they're testing for leaks along these pipelines. None of that, folks, none of it is currently in place in the state of Pennsylvania. Absolutely none of it. And this is why we should be concerned about what's happening within our communities and the pipelines that are being put in. As I said before, when I first opened up, we have about 6 inspectors now at the PUC. We're putting in 80,000 miles of new pipeline into the state of Pennsylvania over the next 10 years. About 40,000 miles of interstate pipeline and about 40,000 miles of intrastate pipeline. 80,000 miles in a state that's only about 40,000 square miles. Think about that. This should concern all of us. And it's a concern that we've taken seriously. And one of the things that we have done was form the Mayor's Coalition for Pipeline Safety. Now, you don't have to be a mayor to join. We also got a grant from PHMSA. In fact, we just got our 3rd grant for our 3rd year. We joined with our sister city in San Bruno, California, to create a national organization for mayors and other elected officials or just interested folks to get involved, to talk about the issue of pipeline safety, to push for greater regulations, to make sure that we have regulations that focus on protocols and specific activities that our states need to do, that our PUCs need to do, to basically address this issue and make sure that these pipelines that are going through our communities and our municipalities are put in safely and they're put in under some sort of regulatory context. And so we're looking to work on it to improve, engineering and damage prevention and public education and community awareness and really emergency response. Because I don't think, I've seen some folks here from fire companies, I don't think many of our communities, if any, really knows how to respond when one of these tragedies occurs within our communities. I'll just ask you guys, do you, if a gas line blew, I mean, do you have the capacity to really, shaking your head? Probably not, right? You know, so it is a tough issue to address once tragedy occurs. And I say once tragedy occurs because I believe it's just a matter of time in many of our communities, because there's no oversight, because there is little effort on the part of the state to basically regulate this in any way, shape, or form, or to push these gas companies to replace the pipeline that already exists. We're here tonight to talk about new pipelines that are going in, but there's a lot of pipeline that is underneath our municipalities that already exist, that is aging pipeline, like in Allentown, especially our older communities, our older cities, that is dangerously at the point of its obsolescence. That's going to occur, that's going to crack, that's going to have another disastrous effect somewhere in the future. I can tell you, 2 weeks after we had that major gas explosion here in Allentown, just 2 weeks, they were debating the Federal Pipeline Safety Act. Rand Paul was out in Congress talking about how it's a travesty that we're trying to regulate pipelines throughout the country. And we had a scenario just 2 blocks away from where that gas explosion occurred. I remember 5 people died as a result of that, 60 people got injured. 2 blocks away, we had a nursing home with basically about 40 of the folks that were on ventilators, okay? We had a gas leak. This was just 2 weeks after that major explosion. We had a gas leak. We had reports of gas smell coming from all over the neighborhood. No one knew where it was. We had our fire department going around for literally 4 hours trying to locate this. In front of that senior citizen facility, we opened up the manhole cover and had 90% gas leakage. Now, all we had to do was somebody had to throw their cigarette butt out the window, and that would have been probably the greatest natural gas tragedy in this country's history as a result of that. And so it woke me up to what's happening here in our state. It was a wake-up call for me and for our city council that we really have to be engaged. And so I am asking you, as you come through and you're listening to us tonight, get involved. Go on our website, Mayor's Coalition for Pipeline Safety. We encourage anyone who's interested in safety of our communities to join this council. It's not just for mayors, it's for anybody who's really concerned about pipelines within their communities. There's no financial commitment needed to get involved. We simply ask that you read, that you agree to uphold the statement of principles, and you register to become a member. So go on our website so that this never happens again in any of our neighborhoods. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's my pleasure now to welcome Roberta Winters to the podium to continue the program. We're going to move into the area that we're really talking about tonight, which is recognizing that things are changing here in Pennsylvania, and particularly they're changing for Berks, Lehigh, Northampton, and Bucks County. I'm not sure how many people are here from Bucks County, but I know that we're going to have a presentation in Berks tomorrow, and we're here for Lehigh and Northampton County now. One thing I want to bring to everybody's attention, when you checked in, you got a index card. If you get questions as we're going through this, we'd like you to put the questions on the index card. We're going to try to organize the questions so at the end we can get them answered in a reasonable period of time so we can all get home. After John Gatt makes his presentation, we'll try to collect as many questions you have by then, and then if you want to hang on to your card for Gary Kraft's presentation, we can do that then too. But we'll try to get those questions answered as quickly as possible and as orderly as we can so we get out of here at a reasonable time. So without further ado, Ms. Winters, Dr. Winters.
Well, you've heard the long of it, now you're going to hear the short of it, right? Why should we care about pipelines? Okay, well, it's all about natural gas. Marcellus Shale is a layer of sedimentary rock that underlines about 2/3 of Pennsylvania at varying depths and thicknesses. And because of the evolving technology of unconventional horizontal drilling and fracking, the volume of recoverable gas in this region has grown by leaps and bounds. In fact, in 2002, the U.S. Geological Service estimated there was 1.9 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that was accessible. A decade later, the U.S. Energy Administration estimated that 141 trillion cubic feet were available. Still further, underneath the Marcellus is the Utica Shale. That's over on the right side. And that has 38.2 trillion cubic feet of technically recoverable gas, 940 million barrels of oil, and 208 million barrels of natural gas liquids. So based on these recent test wells in the Utica Shale, some predict that this shale is even going to be a greater energy source than the Marcellus. Now, the daily production of natural gas in Pennsylvania, shown on that chart, tells the story. This region is now producing more than 40% of the natural gas in the United States. Pennsylvania has grown to be the second largest gas-producing state in the nation, just behind Texas. And natural gas has become a significant economic force. This graph is the latest based on actual production records. In 2013, Pennsylvania more than doubled its production from 2012 to 2013, and is expected to double again this year. In other words, by the end of 2014, we will be able to produce 7,000 billion cubic feet of methane, worth about $8 billion in this year alone. This exponential growth is dependent on finding ways to get the natural gas to the market. In fact, many of the Marcellus wells have been capped and are waiting for the necessary infrastructure to be built. Now, given that volume of natural gas coming from the Marcellus Shale region alone, companies need to find a way to move the gas to market. Trucks carry low volumes, damage our roads, and pose a real and present danger on our highways. Trains, given their aging infrastructure, and the degraded tank cars generate high risks with relatively low transported volumes. When liquefied and under high pressure and cold temperatures, natural gas can be shipped by boat. When special ships are capable of transporting high volumes, that can work, but the liquefaction process is very costly and also fraught with risk. So the natural gas still needs to move from the well to the port, and from the port where it's being shipped to the market. So pipelines are the safest and most efficient way to transport hazardous materials such as natural gas. Thus, we are looking for large-scale pipeline growth, as the mayor mentioned, to the population and export centers in the country. As of 5 years ago, the U.S. had more than 210 natural gas pipeline systems, 305,000 miles of inter- and intrastate transmission pipelines. And according to the Marathon Pipeline Company, there are more than 2.5 million miles of underground energy pipelines in the United States transporting petroleum products. So, if you want to know, that blue line is natural gas, the red lines are liquid fuels, and that usually follows on any of the pipeline maps you'll see. Drilling down to Pennsylvania, we see the map of the major interstate gas transmission lines and storage areas in Pennsylvania. And in 2011, the Nature Conservancy reported that Pennsylvania had over 8,600 miles of large diameter interstate and intrastate transmission pipelines. I didn't bring my hula hoop, but that's about the size of a 36-inch pipeline, if you can remember doing the hula hoop. Now, you can see these pipelines are color-coded by the operators, and they crisscross every county, mostly, and you can see those in Lehigh Valley, Bucks, Berks, Northampton. And you will continue to be prime targets for expanding of existing pipelines and the building of new pipelines because you're strategically located on the way to markets, such as New York and Boston, and proposed and potential export facilities in Maryland, Long Island, and Philadelphia. Remember, this is an international industry with a global market. The gas pipeline system is more than transmission pipelines, however. because pipelines themselves vary in size and in contents. Many of you have traveled to the northern tier and probably seen gas wells and gathering lines. Since 1972, UGI has had, in fact, 1.25 billion cubic feet of liquid natural gas storage facility in Temple, Berks County. So some of the natural gas storage facilities are right in our backyards. There's also some discussion, as Mr. Jansen noted, about an Emberclear gas to liquid plant being proposed in South Heidelberg, again in Berks County. Compressor stations and facilities to keep the gas moving at constant pressure and to remove impurities are also throughout the Lehigh Valley, with some newly upgraded ones in Columbia East Side expansion in Bucks County. In Northampton, PP&L operates the Lower Bethel Energy Plant that generates electricity by burning natural gas. And many of you have distribution lines run by PECO and UGI that come to your homes and offices. And in 1992, just think about that, more than a decade ago, the Berks Area Regional Transportation Authority became the first small authority in the United States to use compressed natural gas buses. And the Lehigh Gas Partners out of Allentown currently plans to open 20 new compressed natural gas filling stations in this region in the next few years as part of their clean energy initiative. Now, here are some pipelines in Berks County. The blue lines represent those for natural gas, the red ones for the liquid. When you compare the blue and red lines, Bucks has relatively more natural gas lines than Berks. And here is Lehigh County. It has its share of liquid lines, as you can see, and they mostly run north and south. Lastly, you can see Northampton County, which has far more natural gas lines and potentially more on the horizon. Now, to reduce the risks of pipeline, which the mayor also spoke about, the U.S. Department of Transportation, through the Pipeline and Hazardous Safety Materials Administration Office of Pipeline Safety, formed a Pipeline and Informed Planning Alliance. It was made up of over 130 stakeholders. These are individuals from different groups, and they were chosen to develop a report and make recommendations. These were designed to protect both health of the public and the pipeline infrastructure. It includes lots of suggestions for elected officials that are summarized in a chart that we have distributed to each of you in your programs. These checklists are a great place to start, as they point out key areas for consideration by key groups from local government and property owners to operators and real estate agents. If you have your eye on these issues, you can prevent things like this from happening. Here's an example of what you can call poor planning. When development occurs too close to an existing pipeline or right-of-way. When a pipeline needs to be repaired or expanded, it can be quite disruptive. Building on the Piper report, the National Association of Counties introduced a summary report for elected and appointed officials. We have provided some of those excerpts from you, and they're also a key reference for your future. You'll hear more about that and the county-wide planning strategy later from Gary Kraft. Now, here is an example of an approved pipeline expansion project that will include a new 36-inch pipeline that will run 5.6 miles through Berks County and 5.6 miles in Bucks County. In addition to such expansions, new pipelines are being promised and proposed that run through multiple municipalities and counties. Planned pipelines are crossing our counties and bringing the natural gas from shale-producing regions to the markets. Based on the increase in natural gas production, there are more transmission lines on the way. This is the best way to get the gas to the customers. This Penn East 100-mile project goes through Northampton, Lehigh, and the tip of Bucks. This project is slated to create 2,000 jobs during construction and provide 1 billion cubic feet of natural gas each day, enough to heat 4.7 million homes. One example of county-wide planning has been in neighboring Chester County. Because of its location, they have had many decades of old interstate pipelines that once ran through their rural area that today are highly populated. Based on their experience, they have developed a pipeline information center that is a great resource, and I believe that's also listed in your materials. So this is a place I would begin to look. And now I'd like to ask John to come forward to tell you about some of the things you might do in your local areas as you address pipelines, both old and new.
I've been involved in pipeline issues for about 6 years now, working on a succession of TAG grants, the technical assistance grants that we're talking about this evening, and one of the funding sources for the program tonight. And I live in Chester County, and Roberta just mentioned that Chester County initiative with the pipeline website. It's been an interesting road. We have, in Chester County, we have more than 25 transmission pipelines, and there are several more in the works. And as you know, that shale gas needs to get to the eastern markets, and Chester County is one of those routes to get there. So what we've been trying to do with the different TAG grants I've been working on, excuse me, is look at the land use component of all this and the different agencies that the mayor talked about that are or are not doing anything about this issue. Okay. Oh, there we go. So I wanted to give you a little of the legal legislative background here. And it is an alphabet soup. It's not an easy thing to get your hands around. And there's no one agency, as the mayor talked about, that's really responsible. And in some ways, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but in most ways, it is a bad thing. At the federal level, we have FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They're responsible for all interstate transmission pipelines. In addition to FERC, we have PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They're responsible for safety issues with regards to pipelines. In Pennsylvania, we have the Oil and Gas Act, which was recently amended under Pennsylvania Act 13, and that consolidated and modified the old Oil and Gas Act of 1984. We've had recent Pennsylvania Supreme Court rulings and recent Commonwealth Court rulings, and the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission also plays a role. In addition, municipalities are starting to look at this issue. And what role do they have to play under the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code, Act 247? And what municipalities and counties have been doing is looking at that PIPA report that Roberta mentioned and looking at different communities across the country to see what they're doing with regards to this issue. So again, we have federal, state, and local participation. We're not working with a perfect system or in an ideal system. However, the issue that I've been looking at for the last 6 years is what role does the municipality have to play in Pennsylvania? So let me get into just a little bit about what's been going on in Pennsylvania that's affected that municipal role. Act 13, as you know, tried to update and regulate the oil and gas industry. The last act was from 1984. And Act 13, upon its adoption, was immediately taken to court with the Robinson case. And the Robinson case challenged certain provisions of the act. Specifically, and you'll see up here, there were 2 sections that were being challenged in terms of their excluding a municipal role in terms of pipeline planning. Section 3303 excluded municipal regulation of oil and gas operations, and Section 3304 required uniformity of local ordinances, including use and setback requirements for siting and oil and gas operations. So the idea was that municipalities really didn't have a role to play. If they wanted to play a role at all, they had to meet a state standard. And in essence, the state was the one that was really doing the regulating. The Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court found portions of that act to be unconstitutional, and the case was appealed by the state of Pennsylvania to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. In December of 2013, the Supreme Court decreed that the state does not have absolute power over municipalities in terms of environmental protection, and that Act 13 actually puts municipalities in direct conflict with their constitutional authority to protect the environment and the rights of citizens to those environmental resources. That's the Environmental Rights Amendment, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. Okay. I think I'm the one having the most trouble with this. The Supreme Court also agreed that those two sections I mentioned, sections 3303 and 3304, were unconstitutional, and the state asked the court, the Commonwealth Court, to reconsider certain components. The state of Pennsylvania asked the Supreme Court to reconsider its opinion. The Supreme Court did, but did not change its opinion, and now that decision is final. But those sections that the Supreme Court remanded back to the Commonwealth Court dealt with the role of the Pennsylvania Utilities Commission in reviewing local zoning ordinances. That was one of the provisions under the act, is that any municipality that enacted a zoning regulation had to have it reviewed by the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission. What happened as a result of that is that the Commonwealth Court in July of this year ruled that challenges to local ordinances had to come before municipal planning boards, not the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission. So again, what's happening here is that municipalities are starting to see some of their vested rights under Act 247, the Municipalities Planning Code, be upheld by the Commonwealth Court and the Supreme Court. Now, the one issue that hasn't really been ruled on to any great effect is the role that the Pennsylvania Public Utilities Commission has in terms of exempting pipelines from local zoning laws. If the PUC finds that a pipeline is reasonably necessary for the convenience or welfare of the public, they can exempt that pipeline from local zoning. However, what I found was interesting, that was just in July of this year, a decision by the PUC's administrative law judges, the judges that actually rule on PUC matters, questioned the efficacy of that and whether or not that's an appropriate approach. So I think we're going to see more action in that area coming up. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on the Municipalities Planning Code, because that's really what gives municipalities a role or a stake in all of this. And I'm not going to say a lot, but I'm just going to show you these slides and tell you about how the Municipalities Planning Code empowers municipalities to zone, I think as everyone knows, promote and protect public safety, health, and morals, and to regulate and guide uses of land and structures in their communities. Further, in section 604, the PUC talks about promoting and protecting and facilitating, again, the public health, safety, and general welfare. And you go down there and you look at things like emergency management and preparedness, provisions for adequate light, air, and access to solar energy, which I think is interesting, things like water and sewer and other types of infrastructure. and to prevent things like overcrowding of land, danger or congestion of travel and transportation, which is what our pipelines are doing, transporting a commodity, and then loss of health, life, or property from fire, flood, panic, or other dangers. Section 605 talks about how zoning ordinances or districts can be created. It talks about structures and different types of facilities, protecting resources, natural resources. So what I've found over the last 6 years in sort of looking at this issue and responding and reacting to what's going on, both in terms of legislative initiatives and court findings, is that municipalities really do have a role to play. And the municipalities that I've been talking to as a professional planner really do want a say regarding the land use implications of pipelines. They really feel that there is a role for local municipalities in terms of addressing the health, safety, and welfare of these kinds of issues. And they think that pipelines can and should be consistent with local land use laws and comprehensive planning at the local level. The question from a legal perspective is the how versus where. The Oil and Gas Act in Pennsylvania, FERC, the PUC, all are playing a regulatory role in terms of the how things are done, how that well pad is installed, how that stream is crossed with a pipeline. That is not necessarily a municipal role. What's the municipal role here under Act 247 is the where. And in terms of protecting residents, where should those pipelines go? How close should development be to those pipelines? And should the uses that are affiliated with pipelines, such as compressor stations, be regulated under local zoning laws? So what municipalities are looking to do is really address uses, pipelines and their appurtenances, such as compressor stations and wellheads and things like that, that are not otherwise permitted in local zoning. Makes sense. Screening against and securing against vandalism, looking at suitable access to pipeline sites in case there is an emergency or a rupture of a facility or a pipeline, doing things like setting back new development from pipelines, buffering those things, looking at signage. And municipalities are really vested here with the land use planning obligations in the state of Pennsylvania, so they really do have a role to play. Okay, so the technical assistance grant approach that we took down in Chester County really tried to evaluate those Supreme Court and Commonwealth Court rulings, and we came up with a series of ordinances under my most current TAG grant with West Pikeland Township, which is a multi-pronged municipal regulatory approach that addresses 4 areas. The first are those surface land uses affiliated with pipelines, so providing for those uses that are not permitted in most ordinances today. The second is dealing with street opening ordinances for municipalities where pipelines are going to cross local roads. Standards for new development in proximity to pipelines. So how do you regulate new development that's going to be near an existing or proposed pipeline? And then finally, revisions to municipal comprehensive plans that provide that rational nexus under Act 247 between your planning and your zoning and your subdivision regulations. So these 4 items really combine to provide an effective approach. And what we've developed in terms of these sample ordinances is really considered on solid ground from a planning and legal perspective, post Act 13 and the Commonwealth and Supreme Court decisions. So what I want to do is walk you through each one of these briefly. The first item are the surface land uses affiliated with pipelines. So these are things like I mentioned, the compressor compressor stations, pumping stations, launchers, and other types of surface land uses affiliated with pipelines. There are uses that aren't currently permitted, and municipalities need to accommodate those types of uses. So the purpose is to accommodate those uses consistent with the desire to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of the municipality, minimize the aesthetic nuisance and visual impacts, ensure that the location of those uses complies with industry standards and state and federal law, and we preserve community character adjacent to those uses. So some of the locational provisions. Municipalities can determine what zoning districts they want to permit those types of uses within, whether they be in an industrial district or a special use district where pipeline corridors already exist. There may be areas where a municipality wants to prohibit those types of uses, say within a historic preservation district, or whether there's a scenic corridor overlay, or there may be a special natural resource area that you want to protect. There may be the opportunity for you to provide for these uses as a conditional use, so there's actually a hearing process at the local government level so that you can find out more about what's being proposed by the pipeline company. So some of the standards deal with things like setbacks, screening and buffering, things like noise, which can actually be a big issue with regards to some of these surface land uses like compressor stations. Everything from odor to signage to parking and lighting, how the facility or the site is designed, the need for documentation of licensing from state and federal agencies, and even things like removal requirements if that facility goes out of operation. So that's the first item. The second item are the street opening standards. And these are really for any municipal roads. They're not necessarily pipeline related. And some of you may have standards like this now. A lot of municipalities actually have street opening ordinances. But what they do is they provide for the regulation of street openings, installations, and driveways. And the purpose was really to have applicable local standards in terms of cutting, opening, excavating along or across municipal roads. Now, since a lot of municipalities already have this, we thought, well, it's important for municipalities to have this, especially where they're dealing with pipeline companies. And things like, having a local permit or an application process, recognizing the PA1 call system, how do you deal with traffic maintenance when you're actually crossing a local road, all those kinds of things are built into these standards. So I won't read all of these, but things like erosion control and OSHA requirements, having insurance, these seem like very straightforward things, but if you don't have these in place in your local municipality, they're worth considering. So that's the second item. The third item is really standards for new developments in proximity to pipelines. So what we're looking at here are really plan submission requirements, buffering setbacks, signage, things, landscaping provisions for new development adjacent to transmission pipelines. And what we're trying to do is incorporate pipelines into the site planning activities that the municipality does on a routine basis. So the purpose is to help minimize risk to the public from pipelines and from land use being located, new land use being located too close to pipelines. Minimize the likelihood of accidental damage, avoid exposing land uses with high on-site populations such as nursing homes and schools that are difficult to evacuate, and then just to reduce the adverse impacts. So some of the applicability and the standards, there could be a plan content for preliminary and final plan submissions for these types, for all new development. You have to document the location, the right-of-way limits, and the easements for transmission pipelines. There are setbacks for new uses, including the potential impact radius. I'll talk about that in a minute. Protection of pipeline right-of-way, so that no one is actually illegally entering the pipeline right-of-way or undertaking an activity within the pipeline right-of-way that's not appropriate. Consultation zones, these are areas where new uses in proximity to pipelines. It requires applicants to communicate plan details to the pipeline applicants, so new development would have to actually talk to the pipeline owner if they're within a certain distance of the pipeline right-of-way. So these are all the standards that are built into these sample ordinances. Other types of standards. When we talk about land uses with high on-site populations, nursing homes, again, schools, there's a provision that within 660 feet of pipelines, those uses have to develop mitigation measures and emergency procedures so that their employees are educated about what could happen in the event of a pipeline rupture. There are design, buffering, and screening standards incorporating the linear appearance of the pipeline into development design, landscaping to minimize and buffer the pipeline, and then signage in terms of like warning signs or identification signs for the pipelines. So what we're trying to avoid with this type of regulation is this. This is in Washington State. The figure on the left-hand side was from 1990. When the pipeline went through, there was no development at all. And in 2002, you can see where the pipeline is on the right-hand side, and it's, right down the middle of that subdivision on both sides. Was that the most appropriate thing to do in terms of planning for new development around that pipeline? So that's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid in Pennsylvania. One of the concepts we talk about in the sample ordinances is this potential impact radius. And it's an impact radius that was determined by knowing the diameter of the transmission line and the pressure of gas within that line. And you can see the circles there where the pipeline is. The lower pressure pipeline is the smaller circle. The higher pressure pipeline would have a greater impact on that subdivision. And this is the graph that really shows you. They have different sized pipelines, and they have the hazardous area, the impact radius on the left-hand side and the operating pressure on the bottom. So depending on the size of line, you can see what kind of impact and impact radius you would have. This research was done by the oil and gas industry itself, and it was the basis in the PIPA document for the consultation zones. If you look at that line for the 24-inch pipe, that's 660 feet. So it's really kind of the average in terms of a 24-inch line, and that being sort of the average basis being the need for the consultation zone. It also was used as the basis for the high on-site population and the idea that we need to have mitigation measures depending on the type of line, the size of the line, and the pressure within that line. And finally, the fourth item that we looked at were the municipal comprehensive plans. And again, this really provides that rational nexus between actually planning and then regulating in terms of land use, zoning, and subdivision regulations. And we suggest that municipalities actually revise their comprehensive plans to acknowledge existing and proposed pipelines, to acknowledge the benefits and risks of pipelines in their community, and to really talk about pipelines as a form of infrastructure that maybe in the past they didn't address, but they need to think about doing that in the future. So with that, I'm gonna pass the baton to Gary Kraft, and he's gonna talk about the countywide approach that we were talking about as part of this whole process. Thank you.
You saw a part of this slide a little bit earlier. And I'm not putting it up there because my name's up there, but I'm putting it up there to show you that the group that was involved in what I'm going to talk about is really representative of a pretty diverse and comprehensive group within a typical Pennsylvania county. You have the County Planning Commission, you have borough and township government represented, and you also have folks in a coordinating role with municipal government. So why should we think about a county-wide approach? For those of you who are familiar with governmental structure outside of Pennsylvania, you know that there's a striking difference between the way local municipal government is organized in most other areas outside of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a unique animal because we have so many small local governments that control our own little areas. In other states and commonwealths, you have a more dominant county government that tends to have a bigger picture view of the types of projects that need it. Certainly a subdivision or something like that is handled well within a local municipal setting, but when you look at things like a turnpike, for example, or I-78, or something related to Act 167, for example, where you're looking at the water quality and performance of a stream and an entire watershed. You need to look at a bigger picture than the local municipalities can do individually. Excuse me. I'm good. That's fine. Yep, I'm fine. I survived. And what we're proposing, thank you, is that our local municipalities within counties come together with the leadership of the counties to actually develop broader ordinances, comprehensive plans, and so forth that allow for a compatible look to what the gas pipelines are looking at. They're coming in and they're saying they're going to go from this end of the county to that end of the county, and they might be crossing through 5 municipalities. The purpose of the countywide approach that we're advocating is to have, in a nutshell, one set of regulations that each municipality can enforce along with county coordination to have uniformity in what is ultimately reviewed and uniformity in what the gas pipeline companies are ultimately needing to provide. So we're encouraging that the county planning commissions engage in a coordination role where they are taking the lead within the county to establish a coordinated effort whereby the planning for existing and proposed pipelines can become more uniform. This should be, and logically would be, also involving both the existing and proposed gas pipelines. We would hope that and intend that the county, once the structure is established, would work closely with municipalities to develop what would hopefully be a consistent zoning ordinance amendment, subdivision land development ordinance amendment, and amendments to the comprehensive plans so that there's uniformity related to pipelines across the municipal spectrum. There may be some bumps in the road along the way in that process, and as an option, we believe that standalone ordinances that are likewise uniform could also have value in this case. Municipalities certainly need to be heard, and we're advocating that the municipalities become an active participant in the county planning level so that their individual interests are represented and heard and incorporated into the overall planning process. So the benefits of this. The benefits that I have listed on this slide are really two-way. They're providing consistent requirements whereby a pipeline company coming in will be able to, for example, provide one environmental study that would cover the gamut of the entire course through the county. They would provide one environmental review, one review related to historic preservation, high and low impact areas and so forth. And they don't have to worry about the individual nuances that each municipality tried to slip in to their own individual ordinances. That can't help but make the gas line companies less apprehensive and ideally more cooperative in trying to work with county and local government to be able to effectively address the concerns of both. Certainly, corridor planning would be far easier when you're looking at a county level, not an individual municipal level. I can't imagine any 2 or 3 municipalities along a corridor line completely agreeing on a route if they were trying to do it individually. One of the benefits that you have from having county planning involved more actively is the county-based resources, such as their understanding of existing pipeline networks, existing rights-of-way, and also the cultural and historic types of important issues that should and could impact the location of a pipeline. It would also be able to steer pipelines away from higher consequence areas and guide them more toward lower consequence areas. And that can do that just by the extent of the regulations. If you have more stringent regulations in high consequence areas and you're trying to run a pipeline through, you're obviously going to try to avoid dealing with the impacts where the restrictions are more strenuous. So you would tend to channel them to the low consequence areas more readily. John talked about the consultation zones. Certainly, there are logically areas where consultation zones are valuable and should be a part of the planning process. And if you have them defined uniformly throughout a corridor, the attention that it would get would be much more significant. In the process, we believe that there's a couple of things that are very important. One is that there would be a point person, a county guru, a lead planner, or whatever you want to call that person, who is the go-to person when it comes to pipeline planning and pipeline questions. We would hope that through the county, there would be some sort of notification protocols that get established through planning process, through emergency process, and so forth. And we would hope that this could also result in a more uniform review process that could be implemented as a pipeline company would want to come through. Again, I mentioned the notification protocol. That would also affect the changes to pipelines and the usage and so forth. Would also need to extend to emergency preparedness and have impacts from the county 911 type emergency facilities. So with that, Paul?
All right, I'd like to invite our speakers to come up here on the stage, and we're going to move to this portion of the program where we're going to try to deal with questions that are posed by some of our attendees. First of all, though, I'd just like to say that I am really proud of the effort the League of Women Voters is putting in this area, and also the people who have spent a lot of time, a lot more time than I think any of us thought we would spend on this project. And certainly, you know, as we look at an area that has little to no regulation involved in it, you have a whole bunch of public officials here sitting in front of you that are committed to trying to make a difference now as we move forward. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at that map where that Marcellus Shale and Utica region is, and immediately to the east and south is a third of this country's population. And so that gas has to get to those locations, and the pipelines are the way that they're going to do it, unless we decide we're going to put it on rail or we're going to put it in trucks, and that's not a good way to go also. So let's go, let's take over a couple of these questions and see where we go with it. What immediate action can be taken to ensure safety for all today? The reason why I'm posing that question first is that up until recently, there has been absolutely nothing that we could do. The entire natural gas industry was completely independent of any kind of local control or regulation that we had. The mayor talked about that in his disaster in Allentown. I think that we're starting to look at ways that we can be involved, but it doesn't include things like telling the gas company they have to replace the line. That's not the area that we can be in right now. So if anybody would like to add to that question.
I mean, I think it's a pretty broad question. I'll take a shot at it. I think one of the things you need to do is you need to get involved. I mean, the fact that you're out here tonight, that you're paying attention to this issue, I think is the first step to really making a difference. So many folks don't pay attention to this. We hear about these pipelines that are going through our communities. We hear about the fact that they're going to be intersecting through our neighborhoods. And for the most part, I think the vast majority of folks just aren't paying attention. Now, that could be a problem when something goes wrong, obviously. I think we have the ability, as you've heard tonight, to, on a local level, start enacting some ordinances, some planning codes that will be able to at least put some sort of regulation on where these pipelines are going within our neighborhoods and within our communities. We still don't have a lot of discretion when it comes to fighting or being able to have any sort of input into these decisions. The PUC here in Pennsylvania is fairly weak. I think I'm being generous when I say that. We don't have a very strong DEP looking out for the benefit of the consumer in this respect. And so we need to get involved on a local level. The fact that you're here tonight, you need to go out and start talking to your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues and the groups that you're involved in, and tell them that they need to start paying attention to this. As we start putting pressure politically on our local elected officials to really start taking this issue to heart and taking them to task, that's how we'll be able to really make effective change here regarding some of these pipelines and the safety of these pipelines. Now, I'm going to hand it over to you, but let me just say one thing, okay? I am not against pipelines. Whether you're pro or con against the whole Marcellus gas drilling issue, the pipelines are coming through our communities, and we need to pay attention to that. We need to get involved in the planning of those pipelines and where they're coming through. And they're coming through whether we like it or not, and we need to make sure that they're at least put in safely and properly, and have some state regulation that oversees the implementation of these pipelines as they're coming through our communities. That's where you need to take an active stand.
And I would say, as a League of Women Voters person, one of the most important things you need to do is to educate yourself. And we have lots of resources on our websites, and we've also put them in every local library in these 4 counties so that you can go and find out what to do when an interstate pipeline comes to your community. You can find out about pipelines and how they operate, and what a landowner needs to do if there's a pipeline in their area. So all those resources are available to you, what elected officials need to know. And I was really happy to see the emergency preparedness people, because one of the things we've done most effective as the League is to work with children, because they don't know even what natural gas smells like. And it's so important. That's a #1 safety issue, because their nose works better than our nose. So if there's ways you can help educate kids in your community about safety, that's where it all starts. And then, as the mayor said, political action is critical.
I think I'm just going to echo what the mayor and Roberta said, but the first thought that came to me was be aware and educate yourself. I think you saw from the slides Roberta showed of the economic potential for this resource in Pennsylvania, that it's not going away. It's here to stay, and I'm not opposed to this at all. But if we're going to do it, let's do it right. Let's do it in a way that protects our citizens. Let's do it in a way that gives everyone a stake in the game. Let's not make the mistakes of the past. Pennsylvania is a resource-depleting state. I mean, let's face it. You know, we've had mining for years and years. We've basically made very good use of our resources, but we haven't always taken care of the people and the land after the fact. We have an opportunity now in the 21st century, I think, to do it right. And that's what I'm trying to do, is promote doing it the right way.
But one other comment I would have is to make sure that your emergency service providers know where gas lines are in your community, know what their response procedures need to be. If possible, dialogue with the providers to the pipeline companies, rather, to know where shut-off valves are and so forth.
Tied to the last part of that question is there a report available on what specialized emergency equipment, including the following: special pipeline disaster containment equipment, special training of people and who needs to be trained, and housing of equipment, and how far apart that equipment should be in order to respond? So that's the question. Is there anything on that standard?
I'm not aware of anything, but I'm not an emergency service provider. So.
You know, it's interesting. I heard that the industry itself has a trade group, and the trade group actually has training for members, and they were going to have a series of forums with workbooks and everything, and some of the people in my industry were trying to get some of that information because we thought it'd be useful to really circulate it widely, and they've opted not to release that for public consumption yet. So, that's very unfortunate.
I was fortunate to attend one of the planning sessions for the emergency responders, and the industry does do a good job. I think it's difficult because we depend upon volunteers in many of our areas throughout the Commonwealth, and so not everybody is required to have that training. But again, there are best management practices, and there are which you can ideally hope for, and then there's what happens. And I think we're not always prepared for what really happens. And so things like where valves should be located and where they are located aren't always one and the same thing.
And I'm just going to say, there is nothing that's going to prepare you for a disaster, okay? There was no training that we could have put our fire department through that would have prepared for what happened 2 years ago when that entire city block blew up. What we can prepare for, and what you need, and when I'm going back to political action again, what you need to be involved in is talking to your senators and state reps to get them to put in things like automatic shutoff valves into these lines. Now, they have the technology, folks, okay? We put a man on the moon in the 1960s. We could figure out how to basically manage these pipelines and actually have them run safer than they're running today. There's automatic shutoff valve technology that is fairly effective. The problem is the gas companies don't want to put this technology in because it costs more, and when the automatic valve hits, it will shut off pilot lights in a particular area, okay, if it's in the distribution zone, which means they have to go back and they have to spend time and energy to reignite these pilot lights. Well, I'm sorry. I would rather have my pilot light go out than my block blow up, okay, or my community blow up. And so we're in a point now where we're ignoring the technology that's out there to safely provide some security for when these gas lines leak. And they will. It's inevitable, all right? I have hundreds upon hundreds of miles in this city, which is the third largest city in the state of water lines. I could assume from my engineering department that X number are going to leak no matter what I do. Even when I stick in a new line in, there's going to be leakage. And we account for that, okay? There's going to be leakage in these gas lines. The problem is there going to be major leakage that's going to cause disasters. Eventually there will be, if we don't step up to the plate and we don't push our state legislature to put some regulation on how these pipelines are being developed, how they're being managed, and how they're being operated. I'm sorry to be gloom and doom tonight.
I don't know how many people.
I'm trying to get you excited about this particular issue.
I don't know how many of you read the USA Today, but on Tuesday, the cover story was about these major pipelines that are deteriorating both in cities and in the countryside. Lines that were installed 80 years ago and are cast iron, and they're just rotting away. And so you're getting major issues occurring because the pipelines have aged to the point that they're a big problem. Follow-up question: Can a zoning change be amended after a pipeline is announced?
I'm gonna give that to you. I don't believe so.
You can, the interesting thing is you can definitely address the issue in your comprehensive plan. When it comes to development, the approaches we took were for those surface facilities and for new development in proximity to pipelines. So those kinds of things can still be looked at. You're not going to alter the route of that pipeline necessarily, but there are things you can do to try to ensure the safety of your citizens. And I think that's really where we're coming from. When it comes to these interstate pipelines, it's really the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that decides on where that pipeline's going to go. It's how we respond to that. FERC, as it's called, has asked pipeline companies to consider state and local laws and regulations. So they're not given a blank check by FERC. They're told they need to work with local government and state government. But when it comes to siting that pipeline, that's largely out of our hands. Well, what we're trying to do with these sample ordinances is suggest that there are things municipalities can do.
There's really two things that you're trying to influence when you're amending these ordinances. One is the location of where the new lines are going. The second thing you're trying to influence is how land is developed around it. So if you know a pipeline is coming through a certain corridor and you decide you want to adopt some zoning regulations, you're not going to influence where that line's going. But you can significantly influence where homes and other types of structures are placed with respect to that line. So you could still improve safety for residents through zoning even after you know that a line's coming through.
Here's a good follow-up question. Might be an obvious answer to the question, but it is a question that's posed. Is there any way we can stop new pipeline construction? I think, the one thing that we're learning is that up until 2 years ago, you didn't even have a voice in pipeline construction, much less stopping it. Today, I don't think you can stop pipeline construction, but if you come up with a coordinated process for how you're going to manage that pipeline in your county, you can impact where that pipeline goes. And that's the issue that we're talking about. I mentioned earlier that we had the one gentleman that was with our planning group, Jim Mull from Spring Township. He had a map, and it showed the pipeline coming into Spring Township, through Township, and out. He didn't know where it went on either side. And so he could play around with what he wanted to do inside his township, but he couldn't do anything with where it enters and goes, enters and leaves, because he doesn't have that information. That's what the pipeline companies do. And it's not necessarily bad, but if you had a county-wide approach to it, you'd know exactly what's going on in your entire county, and you could have impact on it at that point.
I'm going to tell you, I think it's very nearly impossible to stop a pipeline going into your community. What you can do, again, and this is my mantra here tonight, is get actively involved in this discussion. If you are concerned about a pipeline coming through your community, go to the PUC. They meet, I think, monthly, right? Am I not mistaken? Down in Harrisburg. Take a group of your fellow citizens with you that are concerned. I can almost guarantee you no one ever shows up to those meetings. They will be shocked and amazed that you're there and concerned about an issue that's, brought before them. But they're ultimately the agency that's going to dictate, at least in part, where those pipelines are being placed. So, if you're really concerned, and you should be, about some of these major transmission lines that are going through your communities, you need to get folks to be actively involved, and I would say even attend some of those meetings, because that will have an impact on them and on their decision-making process, because they never hear from common folks in their decisions when they're formulating these decisions about where these pipelines are going.
I was also going to mention there is a very good piece of literature that's on the League website. It's called What to Do When an Interstate Pipeline Comes to Your Community. It's written by a lawyer who used to work for FERC. Her name is Carolyn Elephant, and I would highly suggest that because that gives you all the steps, and basically the only thing that they have found that has any impact on pipelines are environmental issues. Those tend to have a significant difference in terms of siting. But that's the only thing I've seen that's provided. It will not stop it from coming, but it may change your route.
Great segue to this question, which is, what restrictions might there be to pipelines going through designated wetlands and floodplains?
So, they do have to have the Department of Environmental Protection look at all those things, but I'll let John speak to that.
DEP will definitely look at that issue. What I've tried to do with the local ordinances is have an understanding, and I think this is really where the county approach comes in as well, is that county government has been really good over the years at developing GIS systems, geographic information systems, and they've been able to plot all their natural, historic, cultural resources on mapping, countywide mapping. And so you as a layperson have a really good idea of where these resources are, and municipalities can use that mapping to really highlight where those those sensitive resources are. And I think the thing to do is, again, you go to the PUC, you go to DEP, and you talk to them about your concerns. You attend the scoping meetings for these that the pipeline companies are required to have by FERC. You even comment to FERC. I mean, there's no shortage of things you can sort of do, whether you feel they're all productive or not, they're worth doing. I was going to say something else as well. In Chester County, there was a lot of controversy about one of the pipelines crossing the Brandywine Creek and whether they were going to do horizontal drilling or whether they were going to dig up the bed of the creek. And that took years of actual environmental siting and meetings. And the local communities really did have a say. I mean, FERC actually listened to that because of the enormity of the issue. But, I mean, these are things that you need to be aware of in your community. And if there is a pipeline, or a pipeline proposed, you need to be active in looking at those issues.
I think the reality of one of these issues, wetlands, I think there is a lot of impact on what happens with pipelines because it's very expensive to dig the ground and then put a pipe in. And a lot of times they look at boring to get underneath it so they don't disturb the wetlands. But floodplains, that's a whole nother story. You know, when you look at all the rivers that we have in Pennsylvania, all these gas lines cross them. And when you look at areas that are subject to floodplain, the pipes are underground. Where you do have some impact is what could be built above ground, the compressor stations and things like that. They can't be built in floodplains, so they have to be built outside of that area.
Paul, there is a certain irony to all this. In Chester County, we've done a really good job over the years of preserving open space. And a lot of that open space are natural resource areas that we've wanted to protect and preserve. And those are some of the first areas identified by the pipeline companies as likely routes for pipelines because they're areas of low impact. There aren't homes there, and they seem like the easy route for the pipeline to go. So that's an issue we're
too.
grappling with. Yeah.
Safer route also.
Yeah,
Yeah.
from the standpoint of population exposure.
Gary, as a municipal engineer, what can be done in plan review prior to construction? I think that's what we're looking to do here is create a whole series of regulations that make sense, that allow for municipalities to impact how I'm sorry, yes?
That was my question,
Yeah.
and I was leaning toward you're an engineer in a municipality that hasn't implemented any of these regulations, and they sound really good. And a pipeline is coming through. Is that subject to your land development review process? Submission of plans, review of plans?
The question is, if you have a municipality with no pipeline regulations, is a new pipeline coming through your municipality subject to plan review like other land development plans? And the answer to that is no. I have a pipeline coming through one of the municipalities where I serve as municipal engineer and got the call from the gas company asking me what regulations they needed to worry about, and it was basically the street cut regulations. It was the only thing we had that influenced it at all. You really need to adopt something. Now, in that same municipality, we do have some zoning regulations related to future land use. So we do have a setback distance required from pipelines once they're built, but we are not controlling at this point where the pipelines are going or anything related to the construction of it.
It's a long question, but I think it's a good question. If the pipeline company wants to go through land where the pipeline already exists and land on both sides of the existing pipeline is under consideration for an open space conservancy easement, what should the property owner and the easement holder do? I think what they're saying is that the company is looking to expand the easement in order to put a pipeline through. What should the owner do? I'll give you a very personal issue for me that I went through. My brother lives in Hershey, and there is a 50-foot easement that goes between his house and the neighbor's house, and there's 70 feet between the structures of their buildings. In that easement is an 8-inch gasoline or petroleum pipe and an abandoned 10-inch pipe. And the gas company came in and said they wanted to drop a 12-inch high-pressure line right in the middle of that easement. And there's 70 feet between the two houses. If that gas line were ever to explode, there would be nothing left of those two houses, like the mayor was talking about, and probably 10 or 12 houses on either side of those. So the issue is, can a company come in and drop a 12-inch high-pressure gas line into an easement that used to be for an 8 and 10-inch petroleum line? And I can tell you they tried to. In this particular case, the gas company backed off, and they're looking for a different route for it. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of these recent court cases that are coming in that are saying you can't just put pipelines where you want to. You have to consider health and safety in a community.
We were doing some consultation up here. I think we're pretty much in agreement that if the pipeline is coming through, the strongest effort that you would have as an owner of an easement would be to be able to influence the restoration behind it, to make it as close to what it was before and have as minimal an impact long-term, but the gas line would still be coming through.
I don't know if the question had to do with land that was preserved with a conservation easement or something along that line.
Yeah.
Then a lot of the land trusts down in Chester County have been grappling with this issue because the terms of the conservation easement only allow for certain types of uses to occur. And that's a recorded document, and it's the basis for the income tax or the tax deductibility of that easement. It has a lot to do with, why that preservation easement was put in place in the first place. And none of these easements anticipate natural gas or petroleum pipelines coming through. So a lot of the land trusts are grappling with, we have a legal instrument here that restricts development on this land, yet we don't have control over pipeline infrastructure that could potentially come through this area. And it is a big issue, and it's an issue that these land trusts are grappling with a lot right now. I think what I've seen is the land trust sort of working together to try to influence the location of that pipeline. So it may go across an east property, but it may avoid, a sensitive woodland area that's part of a habitat or something like that, or it may avoid a pond or something, that's imperative to that easement.
I think what John said is important. It's to have your voice heard and to work together as much as you can. One thing I would suggest is do not be afraid to negotiate. There are things you can do. For example, the size of the right-of-way may change if you negotiate. But have a lawyer. Don't try to do it yourself. You can do things like maintain the canopy over the top of a pipeline. It'll cost the company more to by foot observe it than it will be to fly over. But those are things that could be negotiated. Usually pipelines are monitored by airplanes that fly over to see if there's dead vegetation. And so the canopy is cut above the pipelines. But trees can be maintained, but again, it requires a great deal of expense on that pipeline operator to provide the kind of inspection. Those things can be done, but only negotiated, and it's probably going to be a long and difficult process. It can be done, but it's trying.
I would just say, listen, it's very difficult to regulate this in any way, shape, or form. Remember the previous question we just talked about, okay? Act 13, which was talked about tonight, was basically the state saying any zoning that you have in place, even if you have zoning in place, is no longer applicable. You can't even enforce it. Now, the state Supreme Court said, no, that's not true. You as a municipality have the right to enforce your own zoning laws. But the state was taking the position that even existing zoning even existing ordinances or regulations on the municipal level had no bearing on where these pipelines went into place or how these pipelines were put in place in these communities. Now, it may seem like we're helpless in this scenario, but I'm going to tell you, folks, that public pressure, as was just mentioned, is very influential. These folks, especially gas companies and utilities, don't like to be in the paper all the time. They don't like to be the source of debates. They don't like to have people come to their, town hall meetings and really make a ruckus. They just don't. They don't like it. And so you can have an impact. And I'm going to give you my own personal example. Mine is a little bit different. It's not new pipelines going in. It's old pipelines that weren't being replaced, okay? When we started the process after this entire block blew up, it wasn't new to me, all right? I've been mayor for 9 years. 4 of those 9 years, I've dealt with gas explosions in the city, okay? 4 of those 9 years, I've dealt with gas explosions that have blown up either multiple houses or entire city blocks. We've had 2.5 blocks of the city basically leveled as a result of gas explosions. The other, times, fortunately, no one died in those explosions. They were just hurt or injured, but it had catastrophic effects on property. When we approached this, we actually had some Senate hearings here. They had a congressional delegation that had hearings on this issue because they were talking about the Federal Pipeline Safety Act at the very same time when this happened. And UGI basically said to us, they said, well, listen, even though your pipe is between 80 to 100 years old, and we know it's cracking, and we know it's deteriorating, and we know it's a problem, we're going to take 40 years to replace the pipeline here in the city of Allentown. Now, if you've got a pipeline that's already 120 years old, and they're going to take 40 years, that's a 160-year-old pipeline that's pushing gas, right, which is already brittle and cracking. They're going to take 40 years. They just didn't want it, the expense. That's the argument they gave at the Senate hearing. It was very expensive, and by the way, we would have to probably go to the PUC to raise people's rates. And, senators, you don't want to do that. You don't have to raise people's gas rates because senior citizens depend on, low fuel costs and so forth and so on. Which I responded, you know what? You had the highest dividend ever in your corporation's history, okay? I'm not saying you shouldn't make a profit. Maybe you just make a little bit less profit, all right? And you actually put the money back into fixing your infrastructure, which is delivering your product. I don't think that's an inappropriate or illogical position to take. Now, I've been taking that position. I've been pushing that issue. I've been putting a lot of public pressure on them, and they have changed their tune. Now what was going to take them 40 years, they're replacing in basically 5. And so all 70 miles of pipeline here in the city of Allentown is being replaced in 5 years. Now, I'm having issues of, they're cutting up my streets like crazy and they're not like repairing them, but it's a whole other issue. At least I know that those streets aren't going to blow up. But you can put adequate pressure on these folks and you can get them to respond. Basically, at the end of the day, UGI just wanted me to go away. And I wasn't even that bad. Okay, I wasn't really, I mean, I could have been a bigger pain in their butt, but I wasn't. I just started talking about the issues and talking about the facts and continuously brought this up to, in the press, how they weren't fulfilling their commitment to the general public. And it made an impact. You all can have the same impact in your communities. Don't think that just because the vast majority of rules and regulations and maybe the entire state government is not working with you doesn't mean that you can't have an impact. You can. We've done it here in Allentown. You could do it throughout the rest of the state, but you got to get people in your communities involved. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
Well,
Wanted to
we're
make-
doing well. There's 2 more questions here, and they're rhetorical, and I'll just take a shot at answering them, and you guys can add into it as we go. Like affordable housing, does each municipality have a responsibility to allow and plan for major distribution lines? Pennsylvania is very clear about that, and the courts, the federal courts have upheld it also, and that is that You cannot prohibit any type of land use, and you cannot put in regulations that affect the fact that all of that has to be available to be done. It doesn't mean you have to make your entire community available. And some of the regulations we're looking at is trying to create corridors and create situations where pipelines could be better. But the fact of the matter is that you can't put a regulation in place that says, go around us. You can't bring a pipeline through our community. It cannot be done. Anybody want to add that? Okay.
You want to
Go
be
ahead.
clear on the distinction between a distribution line, that was in the question, the distribution line?
No, it says major distribution line.
A major distribution line would be a transmission line.
Yeah. Right, yeah.
I mention that because in Montrose, the distribution lines are going in right now with the natural gas in the backyard, up in Susquehanna County, and the gas company pierced the sewer line. So that's over and done with, but we want to make the distinction with the distribution line versus transmission line. They're the little ones that go through to deliver the gas.
There's no regulation there.
Well, no.
You just tell us
Who-
those lines as you are.
Second part of the question is, who has the model zoning criteria that can be used in local zoning ordinances? And that's the phase 2 of what we're going to do after tonight. I'm really hopeful that Berks County and Lehigh and Northampton counties are going to take a lead in really developing model ordinances that will allow for the counties in cooperation with the municipalities. I don't know how many of you are very involved in local government, but it doesn't happen often in Pennsylvania where local governments say we ought to be really working with the counties, because control is on the local level in Pennsylvania. It's not like that in other states. But in this particular case, because of the way these pipelines come into the counties, we think the better way to do it is to work in coordination with the county to try to impact how this happens. So we are going to be working forward to create these ordinances, the 4 sections that John was talking about, but also what Gary's talking about, where we have this interaction between a county permits or county application system and local regulations. We think that's the only way you're really going to have major impact on what happens with these pipelines.
There are also some references to other parts of the country where there are different kinds of ordinances, if you choose to look at those on some of our information that we've handed out tonight.
Yeah, just to follow up the question you had, the point you made about fixing the pipelines and about the money necessary for it. I haven't heard anybody try to pursue the change in Act 13 due to all the wealth destruction in northern tier communities. Individuals and counties are well compensated for their inconvenience. Should the act be reconsidered for the inconvenience of the local municipalities down here with respect to the major transmission lines that are basically taking the gas from northern here? Just a question. And how do you go about doing that?
You want my opinion? Yes. Yeah, yes. I mean, it should be, yes. I mean, obviously, everybody shares this burden, right? Now, if they were to do it right, if they were to have proper regulations, if they were to put in proper safety protocols and valves and procedures and all this, I don't think we'd be having this discussion. The problem is, as I said before, as we started out this whole discussion, is that they're not doing it right, okay? And yes, you have Act 13, which has a pot of money that's up for those who are being affected by Marcellus Shale drilling, but no dollars are really trickling down to the other communities who are getting the pipelines going through them, which are necessary. Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot in Pennsylvania that's screwed up, okay? I mean, you don't have to, I could be here all night telling you all kinds of things are screwed up. But, and even the way we're dealing with this issue is a mess. I mean, the way that Act 13 was put together, the way that they're distributing out those funds, the fact that, if they truly were going to utilize this natural resource in a productive way, they should have figured out how, as pipelines are coming through our communities, that they could figure out how to get industry to use this gas cheaper so that we can actually develop some other industries back into our communities being affected by this drilling. So there's all kinds of things that are wrong with Act 13 and all kinds of things that are wrong with our policy that's out there on a statewide level affecting this. But as far as pipelines are concerned, which is one aspect of the overall policy, it's a scary proposition because no one really, you know, even when you're talking about the whole gas issue, everybody pays attention to fracking, right? I think we've done a very good job of you know, the League of Women Voters and others have done a very good job at educating people on the whole fracking issue and what it means and the impacts that it could have. Now, wherever you stand on that issue, you know, whether you like it or you don't like it, okay, at least you understand what that issue is. I don't think we have really paid attention to the other part of the whole gas process, which is the pipeline issue. And this is an issue I think that's just as important, if not even more important, because it's bound to have effects. I can guarantee you that there's, like I said before, that there's leakage coming out of these pipes. Every pipe leaks. There's not a perfect pipe made in this world that doesn't leak. But it's the question of how we oversee and manage that risk. Okay, we just wrote a letter, myself and the mayor of San Bruno, to the president, congratulating them on this new action plan that they have for methane leakage, and the fact that, you know, they're obviously, you know, trying to affect the amount of methane going into the atmosphere and the greenhouse gases. But do you realize that with all the greenhouse gases that are being transmitted by coal-fired plants, you have more methane leakage coming out of these pipes? In fact, over a 20-year period, it's about 80% more, okay, than a coal-fired plant. So, you know, we start looking at these things on a macro level, and we forget these things like pipelines that are having such a detrimental effect on not only the safety of our communities, but on the overall environment. And that's what we need to pay attention to.
To say one more thing about zoning, if I could. Just because you don't provide for something in your municipality doesn't relieve you of the responsibility to provide for that. In Pennsylvania, as Paul said, we need to provide, every municipality needs to provide for every type of use. That may not make a lot of sense when we have a lot of municipalities in Pennsylvania and the way our government system is set up. But nevertheless, that's the way Pennsylvania law is and the way case law has come down over the years. So if you don't provide for something, you set yourself up for what's called a curative amendment, and somebody could come in and say, you didn't provide for us, we want to be there, and since you didn't provide for us, we can basically do whatever we want. So I think the onus is upon us to, you know, get a handle on this issue and try to be proactive about how we address it, either at the municipal level, some of the things I talked about, at the county level, with the county working with municipalities, which is sort of the plan we came up with through this process. We really need to pay attention because this is not going away.
All right, so we have reached the 9 o'clock hour, so I'll draw a close to the questions. We've answered or addressed each of the questions. And I'd like to turn the program back over to Julianne to close this out for the night.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Very good. Thank you to our panel, everyone. Thank you so very much. And the Center for Excellence in Local Government, absolutely. They made this possible. Please, I can't tell you how grateful we all are that you came out. Please use the League website. As has been mentioned, there are valuable resources there. Please follow along with what the Center for Excellence in Local Government is doing. And if you know of someone, a group, the League will come out and do a program. Dr. Winters, we can't stop her. So just contact us and we'll come and do a program. And also, Chester County, the website, is one of the most valuable websites in the state of Pennsylvania, I dare say. They've been at it so long, and there are so many links, So what is that exact Chester County?
If you just go to the Chester County, just go Google
Planning.
Chester County, and then right on that home page, you'll see pipeline information in a nice colorful circle. Just click there, and it comes right up.
That
So
is
you don't
very,
need to
very
know
valuable.
anything except Google Chester County.
And thank you so much to His Honor, the Mayor. Thank you for coming out.
I was just going to mention, Julianne, before you leave, is if you have somebody you want to show this to, or you might be interested in looking at some of the other league programs, they will be up on our league website probably in the next 6 months, wouldn't you say, Julianne?
Of course.
But we are putting them all up, so, for people who may have missed them.
Thank you.